Airport staff laugh at black woman in simple clothes, freezes when her private jet arrives. The October breeze carried the scent of jet fuel and privilege through the glass doors of Halston Private Airport's VIP terminal. Imani Grace adjusted her worn cardigan against the chill, her fingers briefly touching the small brass button that had come loose weeks ago. She hadn't bothered to fix it. There were more important things demanding her attention these days. She stood at the entrance for a moment, taking in the opulent lobby with its marble floors that gleamed like mirrors and crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow fragments across the walls. Everything here whispered money, the kind of money that bought not just luxury but silence. The woman at the reception desk looked up from her computer screen, her perfectly manicured eyebrows knitting together in a slight frown. Her nameplate read, Chloe Davidson. Guest relation. She wore a fitted blazer that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent, and her smile looked as artificial as the orchids decorating the counter. Can I help you? Chloe's voice carried that particular tone, polite enough to avoid a complaint, but cool enough to convey that Imani didn't belong here. Imani approached slowly, her old leather satchel bumping against her hip with each step. The bag had seen better days, its corners worn soft from years of use. Inside it held everything she needed for today's mission, nothing more, nothing less. I'm waiting for someone, Imani said softly. Her voice carried a subtle accent, the ghost of her childhood in South Carolina before scholarships had carried her to Yale, before she'd built an empire in the shadows. Chloe's eyes swept over Imani's appearance, the faded slacks with their careful patches at the knees, the cardigan that had been expensive once, but was now 3 seasons old, the complete absence of jewelry or makeup. Her gaze lingered on Imani's scuffed flats, probably bought on sale at a department store. Of course. Chloe's smile became even thinner. And who might that be? They'll be arriving shortly, Imani replied. She noticed a security camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. Good. Everything was being recorded. Ma'am, I'll need a name or a flight number to verify. Chloe's voice trailed off as she noticed Imani walking toward the seating area. The lounge was a study in understated elegance. Cream-colored leather seats formed intimate conversation clusters around low tables made from what looked like Italian marble. A few other passengers occupied the space, a man in a 3-piece suit typing furiously on his laptop, a woman draped in designer everything scrolling through her phone while her tiny dog peeked out from an expensive carrier. Imani chose a seat near the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the tarmac. She settled in, placing her satchel carefully beside her, and simply waited. She didn't have to wait long for the whispers to start. Did you see that woman's shoes? The voice drifted from somewhere behind her. I don't know how security let her in here. This is supposed to be exclusive. Maybe she's someone's cleaner, though I don't know why she'd be in the VIP section. Imani kept her expression neutral, but her eyes observed everything. She watched Chloe make a phone call, speaking in hushed tones while glancing in her direction. She noticed the way the other staff members, 2 uniformed attendants and a security guard, began to cluster near the reception desk, their conversation too quiet to hear, but their gestures obvious enough. A young man in uniform approached her. His badge identified him as Kyle Terminal Services. He had the kind of eager, slightly cruel expression that reminded Imani of certain classmates from her prep school days. The ones who sensed weakness like sharks sensed blood. Excuse me, ma'am, Kyle said, not actually excusing himself at all. I think there might be some confusion. This area is reserved for our premium clients. Imani looked up at him, her dark eyes calm and measuring. I'm waiting for my flight. Kyle's laugh was just a bit too loud. Your flight? From here? He gestured around the opulent space. Ma'am, I think you might want to check the main terminal. This section is for private jet passengers only. I'm aware, Imani said simply. The response seemed to fluster Kyle for a moment. He glanced back at his colleagues for support, then pressed on. Well then you'll need documentation, a boarding pass, a letter from the crew, something that proves you're supposed to be here. I'll wait for them to arrive. Imani repeated, her voice remained steady, but something in her posture suggested that this conversation was over. Kyle's face reddened. He was clearly not used to being dismissed, especially not by someone wearing second-hand clothes in his domain. Ma'am, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to. Kyle, what seems to be the problem here? The voice belonged to Jackson Moore. the terminal manager. Imani recognized him from his LinkedIn profile, one of many she'd studied in preparation for today. He was taller than she'd expected, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from years of unchallenged authority. "This lady refuses to provide identification or proof of her reservation," Kyle explained, his voice carrying a note of grievance. "She claims she's waiting for a flight." Jackson's eyes swept over Imani with practiced assessment. She saw the exact moment when he reached his conclusion, the same conclusion Kyle had reached, and Chloe before him. "Wrong clothes, wrong age, wrong everything." "Ma'am," Jackson said, his tone patronizing in the way that powerful men had perfected over centuries. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Perhaps someone told you to wait here? A friend, maybe, who was playing a prank." Imani almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she reached into her satchel and pulled out her phone. It was an older model, not the latest iPhone that everyone else seemed to carry. She scrolled to a message and showed him the screen briefly. Just long enough for him to see numbers that might have been flight information, might have been something else entirely. "I'm waiting," she said again. Jackson's expression tightened. He was beginning to feel the eyes of his other guests on this interaction, and Imani could see him weighing his options. Make a scene and risk a complaint, or trust that this woman would simply fade away when her imaginary ride failed to appear. "How long are you planning to wait?" he asked. "As long as necessary," Imani replied. What happened next would have been funny if it hadn't been so predictable. Kyle whispered something to a colleague, who immediately started filming with his phone. Imani heard fragments. "Weird lady, pretending she belongs, perfect for TikTok." She let them record. In fact, she hoped they posted it. The more evidence of their behavior, the better. 20 minutes passed. Imani sat in perfect stillness, occasionally checking her phone, never showing any sign of impatience or doubt. The staff continued to hover, their whispers growing bolder. "She's probably homeless," someone muttered. "Or mentally ill. Should we call someone? I bet she's running some kind of scam." A new arrival shifted the attention momentarily. A young woman burst through the entrance, all bleached hair and designer athleisure, followed by a small entourage carrying luxury luggage and ring lights. She was clearly some sort of influencer, the kind who documented every moment of her privileged life for the entertainment of others. "OMG, you guys!" the influencer shrieked at her camera. "We're at Halston. This is literally where all the billionaires fly from." The staff transformed instantly. Suddenly they were all smiles and helpfulness. Champagne appeared as if by magic. The manager personally escorted the group to the best seating area, pushing past Imani as if she were invisible. And through it all, Imani waited. She watched the security cameras. She noted which staff members participated in the mockery and which merely observed. She memorized faces and names. She built her case, piece by careful piece. The sun was beginning to set when she finally heard it, the distant thunder of approaching jet engines. Through the window, she could see a shape against the orange sky growing larger as it approached. The plane that landed was magnificent. Sleek, white, and almost impossibly elegant. As it taxied toward the terminal, Imani finally allowed herself a small smile. On the tail of the aircraft, barely visible in the fading light, was a logo that most people would overlook. But Imani had designed that logo herself, 15 years ago. She stood up, slinging her satchel over her shoulder. Around her, the staff continued their whispered commentary, still convinced they were watching some sort of spectacular failure about to unfold. Imani Grace straightened her shoulders and walked toward the window, watching as the jet came to a stop. Its door opened and steps folded down with mechanical precision. The first person to emerge was a man in an expensive suit. He descended the steps quickly, scanning the terminal windows with practiced efficiency. When his eyes found Imani's, he nodded once, sharply. Behind the glass, the staff fell silent. The man approached the terminal entrance, and Imani could hear his footsteps on the marble even through the thick glass. When the doors opened, he walked straight toward her, ignoring everyone else. "Miss Grace," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent lounge. "The boardroom is ready when you are." The silence stretched for exactly 4 heartbeats. Then chaos erupted. But Imani Grace, the woman they had mocked and dismissed, the woman they had tried to have removed, simply shouldered her old leather satchel and walked past them all. The real show was just beginning. 1 week earlier, the morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Imani's penthouse office in Manhattan. She sat at a simple oak desk, not mahogany, not marble, just wood. Despite her wealth, she preferred things that remembered their origins. Her assistant Marcus knocked softly before entering. In his early 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made him invaluable, he carried a tablet and wore the expression he reserved for delicate matters. "Miss Grace, there's something you need to see," he said, setting the tablet on her desk with careful deliberation. Imani looked up from the quarterly reports she'd been reviewing. Aether Sky Group's numbers were good, too good, perhaps. Sometimes success bred complacency, and complacency bred rot. "The email?" she asked. She'd been expecting this for days. Anonymous tips found their way to her inbox regularly. Disgruntled employees, concerned customers, whistleblowers who knew she actually listened. Marcus nodded. "From someone calling themselves Terminal 7? The IP address bounces through multiple servers, but our tech team believes it's genuine. They've included substantial evidence." Imani opened the email. The subject line read, "You own this racism, Halston VIP Terminal." As she scrolled through the message, her jaw tightened. The whistleblower described systematic discrimination at her company's most exclusive airport terminal. Staff routinely mocked passengers who didn't fit their narrow definition of VIP material. Economy travelers who'd won upgrades were turned away. People of color faced longer waits, shorter smiles, and snide comments behind cupped hands. The email contained links to hidden camera footage, audio recordings, and screenshots of staff text messages. A group chat called Terminal Laughs featured photos of unsuspecting passengers with cruel captions. One image showed an elderly black woman trying to find her grandson's chartered flight. The caption read, "When grandma thinks she's flying private because she saw it on the news, confused, lost." Imani's hands trembled slightly as she viewed a video compilation. Staff members rolled their eyes at accented English, made faces behind passengers' backs, and openly discussed who belonged and who didn't. In one clip, Jackson Moore himself laughed at a video of a young Mexican businessman being questioned repeatedly about his right to be there, despite having shown his papers 3 times. "There's more," Marcus said quietly, noticing her expression. "They're posting on social media too. TikTok, Instagram stories, making fun of passengers they believe don't belong." Imani closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they burned with controlled fury. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on the metadata, at least 6 months, possibly longer." She stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked Central Park. From this height, people looked like ants, and she wondered if that's how her employees saw them, as something small and insignificant. "Schedule a board meeting for next week," she said without turning around. "And book me a flight to Halston." Marcus looked confused. "Certainly. Which jet would you prefer? Or shall I arrange for commercial first?" "No." Imani's voice cut through his assumptions. "I'm going commercial. Economy, if possible. I want to see what they do when someone arrives. The way most people arrive. Ms. Grace, I strongly advise against this. If you want to inspect the terminal, surely an official visit would be more appropriate. You could announce your arrival, demand explanations, and they'll put on their best behavior." She turned to face him. "Marcus, I've been in boardrooms my entire adult life. I know how people perform when the boss is watching. I need to see who they are when they think no one important is looking." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "The security risks alone. I'll wear different clothes. Act like a different person. They won't recognize me." She paused, considering. "How many of the staff have actually seen me in person?" "Very few. You've avoided public appearances since the acquisition. Most would only know you from old business magazine photos, if at all." Imani nodded. She'd made a deliberate choice to operate behind the scenes. Unlike other billionaires who courted publicity, she preferred the shadows. It gave her power and, apparently, the perfect cover for this mission. "Then it's settled. I'm going undercover." Marcus looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. "Ms. Grace, with all due respect, this is incredibly risky. What if you're recognized? What if something goes wrong? The liability issues alone." "Marcus." Her voice carried the kind of quiet authority that had built empires. "I didn't become successful By avoiding risks. I became successful, by taking the right risks at the right time. She gestured to the tablet. This is the right time. But why personally? Why not send someone else? We could hire investigators, consult, because this is my company, my name, my responsibility. She returned to her desk, her decision clearly final. I need to see with my own eyes what we've built, and I need to understand exactly what needs to be torn down. Marcus sighed, recognizing the futility of argument. What about afterward? They'll know you were there. There could be lawsuits, claims of entrapment. Imani almost smiled. Let them try. I own 32% of Ethersky Group. I have recording rights on my own property. And most importantly, I have an obligation to ensure our customers receive the treatment they deserve. She picked up the tablet again, scrolling through more evidence. A series of photos showed staff deliberately delaying service for anyone who didn't look right. Text messages revealed betting pools on who would be kicked out of the VIP area next. Book the flight for next Tuesday, she said. Coach seat, middle of the plane. And market? Yes, ma'am. Find me some different clothes. Nothing designer. Nothing that screams money. I want to be invisible. After Marcus left, Imani stood alone in her office. She thought about her younger self, the girl who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for business school, who'd faced her own share of discrimination in boardrooms where she was the only black face, the only woman. The only person who'd earned her seat rather than inherited it. She'd thought those days were behind her. She'd thought success meant being able to shield others from what she'd endured. But power, she was learning, required constant vigilance. It required getting your hands dirty when the people you trusted cleaned them for you. Imani walked back to the window, looking down at the city below. Somewhere out there, in a terminal bearing her company's name, people were being judged by their appearance, mocked for their differences, and treated as less than human. Not anymore. She picked up her phone and typed a text to Marcus. Cancel my engagements for the rest of the week. After Halston, there's going to be a reckoning. As she sent the message, Imani touched the small brass button on her oldest cardigan. The one she'd worn to her first business loan interview 25 years ago. She'd kept it all these years as a reminder of where she'd come from. It was time to remind others that appearances could be deceiving, and that the quiet ones were often the most dangerous. The hunt was about to begin. Back at Halston Private Airport, the situation escalated quickly after the initial confrontations. Kyle, still smarting from Imani's dismissal, decided to make a show of his authority. He whispered something to 2 other staff members, and they approached Imani with renewed confidence. Ma'am, Kyle said, his voice louder than necessary, I'm going to have to ask you to move. This seating area is reserved for passengers flying on jets worth over $10 million. Imani looked at him with mild interest. Is that the official policy? It's common sense. Kyle stammered but puffed up his chest. These seats cost us more to maintain. They're imported leather from Italy. I see. Imani remained seated. And you've confirmed that my aircraft doesn't meet your financial threshold? Kyle's confidence faltered slightly at her calm response, but behind him, Chloe from reception was now recording on her phone. The woman with the designer dog whispered loudly to her companion, "This is better than reality TV. Watch her try to explain why she belongs here." A new voice cut through the growing commotion. Is there a problem here? Jackson Moore had returned, this time accompanied by someone new, a tall, immaculately dressed woman with silver hair and cold blue eyes. Her nameplate identified her as Victoria Sterling, head of guest experience. Nothing we can't handle, Kyle replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Victoria studied Imani, with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades assessing people's worth by their appearance. Her gaze swept over the worn cardigan, the faded slacks, the old leather bag. Ma'am? Victoria said, her smile sharp as a blade. I think there's been a misunderstanding. This terminal is designed for our most exclusive clientele. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in our general lounge? It's quite lovely, and there's complimentary coffee. Before Imani could respond, the influencer who'd arrived earlier suddenly perked up from her corner, having overheard the commotion. Oh my God, you guys, she shrieked, pointing at Imani. Is that lady trying to sneak into first class? That is so embarrassing. She turned her camera toward the scene, This is Madison Summers, and we're witnessing some serious airport drama. The staff seemed to take this as permission to escalate further. Kyle, emboldened by the audience, raised his voice again. Ma'am, you need to understand, this isn't a public waiting area. This is for people who can afford to be here. Just because you wandered in doesn't mean you belong. A security officer, a large man with Rodriguez on his badge, approached. Unlike the others, he seemed uncomfortable with the situation. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said quietly, "if you could just step aside with me for a moment, we can sort this out privately." But before Imani could respond, Jackson Moore held up a hand. "No, it's fine, Rodriguez, we've been patient long enough." He turned to Imani with barely concealed disdain. "Ma'am, I'm going to be direct. This area requires a minimum spending threshold. If you can't produce a boarding pass for a private jet, you'll need to leave." "And if I don't?" Imani asked, her voice still perfectly calm. Jackson's face reddened. "Then we'll have no choice but to escort you out." The terminal had gone eerily quiet. Other passengers watched with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. The man in the three-piece suit had stopped typing and was staring. Even the influencer had lowered her camera slightly, sensing the tension. It was then that a young woman stepped forward. She was young, maybe 25, wearing the same uniform as the others, but with an expression of growing distress. Her nameplate read Maya Chen, Guest Services. Mr. Moore?" Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should—" "Not now, Maya," Jackson snapped, not even looking at her. Maya's face flushed, but she stepped back. Imani noticed the way the young woman's hands shook slightly, the way she glanced toward the security cameras as if hoping someone else would intervene. "You know what?" Kyle said, pulling out his own phone. "I should call the main terminal. Tell them we have someone claiming to be a passenger, but refusing to show credentials." Chloe giggled from behind her phone. "Post it on TikTok, Kyle. When wannabes try to fake it till they make it." Imani reached into her satchel and pulled out her old phone again. For a moment, the staff tensed, perhaps expecting her to make a call of her own. Instead, she scrolled through it calmly. "Interesting," she murmured. "What's interesting?" Victoria demanded. "Well," Imani said, looking up, "I was just checking my flight status. The pilot says they should be landing in about 10 minutes. The laughter that erupted from Kyle and Chloe was loud and cruel. "Oh, this is rich!" Kyle exclaimed. "Lady, what's the call sign of this imaginary jet? What's the pilot's name?" Imani smiled, a small, secret smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The pilot's name is Captain Sarah Martinez. She's been flying for 12 years previously with Delta before we recruited her." The specificity seemed to rattle Victoria slightly. What airline?" "The call sign," Imani continued, ignoring the question, "is probably November 27 Alpha Echo. Or it could be the backup aircraft, November 19 Bravo Charlie," Jackson scoffed. But there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Anyone can make up call signs." "That's true," Imani agreed. "I suppose we'll find out soon enough." Madison the influencer had started recording again. "Guys, this lady is either completely delusional, or—" She paused, perhaps for the first time considering an alternative. The 10 minutes stretched like hours. The staff continued their jokes and speculation, but there was an undercurrent of nervousness now. Even Kyle seemed less certain as he kept glancing toward the windows. Maya stood apart from the group, visibly distressed. At one point, she approached Imani. "Ma'am," she whispered, "I'm sorry about all this. We're not usually like this. Aren't you?" Imani asked gently. Maya opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. Her eyes filled with tears. I should say something. It's okay," Imani said. "I understand the position you're in." At exactly 6:43 p.m., a low rumble filled the air. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a shape appeared against the darkening sky. The aircraft that approached was breathtaking. Sleek and white, larger than most private jets, it moved with a kind of grace that only serious money could buy. As it turned toward the terminal, the late afternoon sun caught something on its tail. Maya was the first to see it clearly. She gasped, her hand covering her mouth. The logo was small, elegant, just two stylized wings forming a circle. but Maya recognized it from her training materials, from the company handbook she'd studied when she'd gotten this job. It was the personal emblem of Ether Sky Group's ownership. "Oh my God," she breathed. Jackson followed her gaze and his face went white. Kyle, still oblivious, was pointing and laughing. "Well, look at that, a plane actually did show up. Of course, just because there's a plane doesn't mean it's hers." "Kyle!" Jackson's voice was strangled. "Kyle, stop talking." But Kyle was on a roll, showing off for the cameras. I mean, anyone could. The plane had landed. As it taxied toward them, Victoria grabbed Jackson's arm. "Jackson," she hissed. "Look at the tail number. November 27 Alpha Echo. The exact call sign Imani had mentioned." Kyle's voice trailed off as he finally noticed the expressions on his colleagues' faces. Chloe had stopped recording. The terminal fell silent except for the whir of jet engines winding down. The plane's door opened, and stairs folded out with mechanical precision. The first person to emerge was indeed a woman in pilot's uniform. Captain Martinez, Imani presumed. She was followed by a man in an expensive dark suit who moved with military precision. The man approached the terminal entrance, his eyes scanning the windows until they found Imani. When he did, he nodded once, crisply, and quickened his pace. The automatic doors slid open, and he entered. The terminal was so quiet that his footsteps on the marble sounded like thunderclaps. He walked directly to Imani, ignoring everyone else completely. "Miss Grace?" he said clearly, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "The boardroom is ready when you are." For exactly 4 heartbeats, no one moved, no one breathed. Then chaos erupted. Kyle stumbled backward, Chloe dropped her phone. Victoria grabbed Jackson's arm so hard he winced. Madison the influencer screamed, actually screamed, and then immediately started recording again. And Imani Grace, the woman they had mocked, the woman they had tried to humiliate and remove, simply stood up, adjusted her old cardigan, and shouldered her worn leather satchel. As she walked past Kyle, she paused. "For future reference," she said quietly, "the policy you quoted about $10 million jets? That was never approved by the board. You might want to check whose authority you're claiming." She continued walking toward the door, where the suited man waited respectfully. Maya watched with tears streaming down her face as Imani approached the exit. As she passed, Imani stopped. "Miss Chen," she said, having read the nameplate. "Thank you for your concern earlier. That took courage." Outside, a black car, not a limousine, just a quiet, expensive sedan, waited by the tarmac. Imani paused at the threshold of the terminal and looked back once. The staff stood frozen like a tableau, their faces reflecting every shade of horror, disbelief and dawning comprehension. "I'll be in touch," Imani said simply. Then she stepped out into the evening air, and the automatic doors closed behind her with a soft, final whisper. The silence inside the terminal was deafening. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, like a dam bursting, chaos erupted all at once. Kyle sank into the nearest chair, his face ashen. "Oh God! Oh God! Oh God!" he repeated like a mantra. Chloe scrambled to pick up her dropped phone, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it again. The TikTok video was still running, broadcasting her horrified expression to her thousands of followers. Victoria Sterling stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Jackson Moore's face had gone from white to green, and he looked like he might vomit on the Italian leather seats. "Who the hell is Imani Grace?" Madison the influencer shrieked, her camera still recording. Maya was the only one who seemed to have retained any composure. She pulled out her phone and quickly searched the internet. What she found made her stomach drop. She's the founder of Ether Sky Group," Maya whispered. "She started the company 25 years ago with a single cargo plane. Forbes estimates her net worth at $12 billion. Rodriguez, the security officer, whistled low. "And you idiots just tried to throw her out. 12 billion? Kyle's voice cracked. "Did you say 12 billion? This can't be happening," Victoria muttered, pacing frantically. "This is a mistake. How are we supposed to know?" Jackson finally found his voice. "Everyone stay calm, we can fix this. We just need..." He was interrupted by his phone ringing. The caller ID showed the main airport administrator. His hand trembled as he answered. "Jackson, What the hell is going on? The voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. I just got a call from Aether Sky Group's head of security. They're saying there was an incident involving the founder. Jackson's mouth went dry. There's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Jackson, I'm looking at social media right now. There are videos of your staff harassing Imani Grace. Imani Grace? Do you understand what this means? The call ended abruptly. Jackson stared at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. We're all fired, Chloe whispered. We're all completely fired. Kyle shot up from his chair. No, wait. She hasn't left yet. We can apologize. We can explain that it was a mistake. They all turned toward the windows. Outside, Imani was speaking to the suited man who had emerged from the plane. He handed her a thick folder, and she nodded as she reviewed its contents. She's reading something, Maya observed nervously. Probably our termination papers, Rodriguez muttered. Victoria suddenly sprang into action. We need to get out there. Apologize. Grovel if necessary. She turned to the group. Everyone, fix yourselves. Smooth your hair. Straighten your uniforms. We're going to. The doors opened, and Imani Grace walked back in. The terminal fell silent again. She moved with the same quiet dignity as before, but now everyone saw her differently. The worn cardigan suddenly looked like a choice rather than a necessity. The simple clothes seemed like armor. The old leather bag could have been carrying the fate of nations. She approached the reception desk, where Chloe stood trembling. Chloe Davidson, Imani said, reading the nameplate. You've been recording me today. I can delete it. Chloe stammered. I'll delete everything right now. No, Imani said quietly. Don't delete it. I want everyone to see how you treat people you believe are beneath you. She turned to Kyle. Kyle? I don't see a last name on your badge. Reynolds? He whispered. Kyle Reynolds? Kyle Reynolds, Imani repeated thoughtfully. You created a policy about $10 million jets. Interesting, since you're not authorized to create policies. Who gave you that authority? Kyle couldn't speak. He just shook his head mutely. Jackson stepped forward, trying to summon his managerial presence. Miss Grace, there's clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. We never would have. Never would have what? Imani interrupted, her voice still soft but with steel underneath. Mocked me, laughed at me, called security to remove me, because that's exactly what you did. She pulled out her phone, the same old phone they had mocked. I have recordings of everything. Your security cameras aren't the only ones that work in this building. Victoria finally found her voice. Ms. Grace, we sincerely apologize. This was unacceptable behavior. We're prepared to take immediate corrective action. What kind of corrective action? Imani asked. Well, training. Sensitivity training. We could implement new protocols. And who would conduct this training? You? Victoria faltered. We could bring in consultants. Consultants who would teach you not to judge people by their appearance. Not to mock customers. Not to deny service based on assumptions. Imani's voice remained steady, but her eyes were fire. These aren't advanced concepts. Victoria, these are basic human decency. She walked to the center of the lounge, where everyone could see her clearly. I received an anonymous tip about discrimination at this terminal. I came to verify it personally. What I found exceeded my worst expectations. She pulled out the folder the suited man had given her. This contains documentation of everything that happened today. Video footage, audio recordings, social media posts. It also contains the information that led me here in the first place. Evidence of systematic discrimination against passengers who don't fit your narrow definition of VIP. Maya stepped forward cautiously. Miss Grace, I wanted to speak up earlier. I should have. You were the only one who showed any concern. Imani acknowledged. Miss Chen, wasn't it? Maya nodded, tears in her eyes. The others have shown me exactly what kind of culture they've created here. A culture where humiliating customers is entertainment, where discrimination is normalized, where making TikTok videos of people you think are beneath you is acceptable behavior. Jackson tried one last time. We can change. We can do better. Imani looked at him for a long moment. Can you, Jackson? Because change requires admitting you were wrong, it requires taking responsibility. And all I've heard today are excuses and attempts to minimize what happened. She walked toward the exit, then paused. You know what the real tragedy is? You had every opportunity to treat me well, even if you thought I was nobody. Even if I had been exactly what you assumed, a lost, confused woman in old clothes. You could have been kind. You could have been helpful. You could have been human. The doors opened, and she stepped through them. But she wasn't done yet. Oh, and one more thing, she called back, her voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence. Tomorrow morning, there will be a board meeting at Ethersky Group headquarters. I suggest you all prepare for it. The doors closed behind her with finality. Through the windows they watched as she walked to the waiting car. She paused to speak with the pilot, Captain Martinez, who had been waiting by the aircraft. They exchanged a few words and Martinez nodded grimly. Then Imani Grace got into the black sedan and drove away, leaving behind a terminal full of people who were only now beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had done. In the silence that followed, Maya's voice was barely a whisper. We're all going to lose our jobs, aren't we? Nobody answered. The question hung in the air, like a death sentence, and they all knew that tomorrow would bring consequences none of them were prepared to face. The 42nd floor of the Ethersky Group headquarters offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. But nobody in the boardroom was admiring the scenery. The 12 board members sat around a sleek glass table, reviewing their quarterly reports and preparing for what they expected to be a routine meeting. Richard Whitmore, the CEO, a silver-haired man in his late 50s, was discussing projected earnings when the doors opened. His secretary rushed in, looking flustered. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Miss Grace is here. She says she's joining the meeting. The room fell silent. Murmurs rippled around the table. Imani Grace had attended perhaps 3 board meetings in person during the past 5 years, preferring to participate via video conference or have her positions represented by proxy. Does she have materials? Asked Patricia Lin, the CFO. She's carrying a laptop bag and what looks like evidence boxes. Before anyone could respond, Imani appeared in the doorway. She wore a simple black suit, not the expensive kind the other board members favored, but one that commanded attention nonetheless. She carried a shoulder bag and was followed by 2 assistants wheeling containers. Good morning, she said simply, taking her seat at the table. Her assistants positioned the containers against the wall and left. Imani, Richard began, his voice carefully neutral. We weren't I'm sure you weren't. She opened her laptop and connected it to the room's presentation system. I'm afraid I need to interrupt your agenda. Something has come to my attention that requires immediate board action. The screen filled with the Ethersky logo, then switched to a slide titled Systemic Discrimination at Halston Private Terminal. Evidence and immediate actions required. The board members exchanged glances. Patricia spoke up. Imani, if this is about customer service metrics, perhaps we could. This isn't about metrics. Imani's voice was steady. Yesterday, I personally witnessed and experienced serious discriminatory behavior at one of our premier terminals. What I discovered goes beyond individual mistakes. It reveals a toxic culture that directly contradicts our company values. She clicked to the next slide. A photo appeared of the Halston VIP terminal. Before I begin, I should note that this presentation includes video and audio evidence that may be disturbing. It also includes footage of myself being harassed, mocked, and nearly ejected from our own facility. Board member James Abbott, head of operations, shifted uncomfortably. Imani, surely this is something that can be handled at a management level. No, the word cut through the air like a blade. James, in my 32% ownership of this company, I have the right to bring critical issues to this board, and this is critical. She clicked to the next slide. A video began playing. Security footage from the terminal, showing Imani's arrival. The board watched in growing discomfort as the scene unfolded. This is from yesterday, Imani explained. I went to Halston after receiving a whistleblower report about discrimination. I dressed modestly to see how staff treat customers they perceive as lesser. The video showed Kyle's first approach, his dismissive tone, the escalating confrontation. Several board members winced visibly. When Victoria Sterling appeared on screen, Patricia muttered, "Oh no, I've worked with Victoria for years," Richard said weakly. "She's never—" Richard, Please don't. Imani paused the video. Save the character references. We're not dealing with a single bad actor. Watch. The video resumed, showing Jackson's arrival, the attempted removal by security, the growing crowd of staff joining in the mockery. When Chloe's TikTok recording appeared, showing her laughing at Imani, board member Sandra Davis actually gasped. "My God," Sandra whispered. "They had no idea who you were." "No," Imani agreed. "And that's precisely the point. This is how they treat people they perceive as unworthy. This is our company culture in action." She clicked to a new slide showing screenshots of the staff group chat Terminal Laughs with its cruel memes and mocked passengers. "This has been going on for months. Our employees are actively mocking our customers, creating discriminatory policies on the spot, and documenting their cruelty on social media." Richard found his voice. "Imani, this is clearly unacceptable behavior, but surely some additional training." "Additional training?" Imani's calm cracked slightly. "Richard, these adults needed training to not mock paying customers, to not create discriminatory policies, to not call security on someone because they don't like their clothes." She stood pacing to the window. "I built this company to be different, to provide exceptional service to everyone who walks through our doors. Instead, we've created an environment where discrimination is entertainment." She returned to her laptop, clicking to a new slide titled Immediate Actions Required. "Here's what's going to happen. First, every employee at Halston Terminal will be reviewed. Those who participated in or enabled discriminatory behavior will be terminated immediately. Second, we're implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination company-wide. Third, we're establishing an independent oversight committee with external consultants to monitor and address bias in all our facilities." James Abbott looked uncomfortable. "Imani, terminating that many employees could disrupt operations." "James, do you know what disrupts operations? Viral videos of our staff humiliating customers. Discrimination lawsuits. The loss of reputation that comes from tolerating bigotry." Her voice hardened. "We have a choice. Act decisively. Now, or watch this company's reputation crumble." She clicked to her final slide. "My position. I own 32% of this company. I can't be overruled on matters of core values and ethics, but I'm hoping I won't need to use that leverage. I'm hoping you'll all agree that this behavior is intolerable in any form." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Patricia spoke. "What do you need from us?" "Full support for the changes I've outlined. Authorization to terminate the identified employees. Commitment to creating a culture of genuine respect and inclusion." Imani returned to her seat. "And a promise that will never allow our success to blind us to our humanity." Richard cleared his throat. "I move that we accept all of Miss Grace's recommendations immediately." "Do I have a second?" "Seconded," Patricia said quickly. "All in favor?" Every hand went up around the table. Imani nodded slowly. "Thank you. I'll have implementation details to you by end of day. And board members, I'll be taking a more active role in operations going forward. Yesterday reminded me that leadership isn't just about quarterly reports. It's about ensuring our values are lived, not just talked about." As the meeting broke up, Sandra approached Imani privately. "That must have been incredibly difficult," she said. "Are you all right?" Imani considered the question. "I've experienced worse discrimination, Sandra. The difference is that yesterday, I had the power to do something about it. Not everyone gets that chance." "Still," Sandra persisted, "to be treated that way in your own company." "Yes," Imani said quietly. "It was a reminder that no matter how successful you become, some people will always see only what they choose to see. The question is, what do you do with that reminder?" She gathered her materials, her resolve hardening like steel. "You make sure it never happens to anyone else on your watch." 3 weeks later, Maya Chen sat in her small studio apartment, staring at an elegant envelope bearing the Ether Sky logo. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter on company letterhead, signed personally by Imani Grace. "Dear Miss Chen," it began. "Your courage in attempting to intervene during the incident of discrimination has not gone unnoticed. While you faced institutional pressure that prevented you from speaking more forcefully, your conscience was evident. Ether Sky Group is establishing a client relations review committee to ensure such incidents never occur again. We would like to offer you a position as a junior consultant on this committee, where your observational skills and moral compass will be valued." Maya's tears fell on the paper. After the mass terminations at Halston, Kyle, Chloe, Victoria and Jackson had all been fired within days. She'd expected to lose her job too. Instead, she was being promoted to help prevent future discrimination. Across town, in her Manhattan penthouse, Imani sat at her desk reviewing the latest industry press releases. The headlines were everything from cautiously respectful to sensationalized. Ether Sky founder emerges from shadows to combat discrimination. The billionaire who dressed like nobody to expose airport bias. Imani Grace, the silent shareholder, no more. Her phone buzzed with interview requests. CNN, 60 Minutes, The New York Times. Everyone wanted the story. A reporter from Business Insider had called her the billionaire who dressed like no one, turning her modest appearance into a rallying cry. She declined them all. Marcus knocked and entered, carrying his tablet. "Miss Grace, there's been an interesting development. The Halston incident has gone viral. Dressed like no one is trending on social media. People are sharing their own stories of discrimination based on appearance." Imani looked up from her papers, and, "Well, it seems your actions have inspired others. Several companies have reached out about implementing similar anti-discrimination protocols. And," he hesitated, "there's a documentary filmmaker who wants to tell your story." "No," Imani said firmly. "This isn't about me. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else." Marcus nodded, understanding. "There's one more thing. The Miami airport incident you experienced in 1998? The one where you were questioned for 3 hours because they didn't believe you owned the plane you'd landed in? Someone leaked that story. It's being shared as part of the conversation about how successful people of color still face discrimination." Imani's eyes hardened. She remembered that day vividly, the humiliation, the doubt, the way security officers had treated her like a fraud despite her documentation. At the time, she'd been too young and unsure to fight back effectively. "Let them share it," she said quietly. "Maybe it will help people understand that wealth doesn't shield you from prejudice. It just gives you more power to do something about it when it happens." That afternoon, Imani left her office early. She had a flight to catch, not on her private jet, but on a commercial airline. She dressed in her usual simple clothes, comfortable slacks, a cardigan that had seen better days, and her old leather satchel. At the airport, she watched as she moved through security, noting how staff treated different passengers. She observed who received smiles, who got extra attention, whose documents were scrutinized more carefully. Old habits, she supposed. Some patterns of observation never leave you. At her gate, she chose a seat in the middle of the waiting area. A janitor worked nearby, mopping the floors with quiet efficiency. He was an older black man, with kind eyes and calloused hands. The kind of hands that spoke of decades of honest work. When their eyes met, he nodded politely. "Afternoon, ma'am." "Good afternoon," she replied, offering a genuine smile. A moment later, a harried business traveler knocked over the janitor's bucket while rushing past, water spilling everywhere. The businessman didn't pause or apologize, just hurried on. The janitor sighed and began cleaning up the mess. Without thinking, Imani stood and grabbed some napkins from a nearby coffee cart, kneeling to help. "Oh, you don't need to," the janitor began. "It's no trouble," Imani said, soaking up the water. They worked side by side for a moment. When they finished, the janitor looked at her with surprise. "Thank you, ma'am. Don't get much of that kind of help around here." "Everyone deserves respect," Imani said simply. As she returned to her seat, she noticed a few other passengers had been watching. Some looked puzzled by her behavior. Others smiled approvingly. A young woman nearby actually seemed to recognize her and started to approach. But Imani subtly shook her head and looked away. She wasn't here to be recognized, she was here to remember what it felt like to be treated as human. Nothing more, nothing less. When her flight was called, she boarded with everyone else. No special treatment, no VIP entrance, just another passenger in comfortable clothes with an old bag, heading to her destination. As the plane taxied down the runway, Imani looked out the window at the terminal buildings. Somewhere in those structures, policies were being rewritten. Training programs were being developed. People were learning, or being forced to learn that worth isn't measured by appearance. The work would continue. There would be other terminals, other incidents, other opportunities to choose kindness over judgment. The difference now was that she wasn't just observing, she was acting. She pulled out her old phone and typed a text to Marcus, set up a meeting with our other airport managers. It's time to expand the initiative company-wide. As the plane lifted off, Imani Grace smiled slightly. She thought about Maya, about the janitor, about all the people who deserve better than judgment based on appearances. This time, she thought, settling back in her middle seat, I'll be watching from the inside, and I'll make sure everyone knows they're being watched. The quiet ones, she'd learned, were often the most dangerous. Not because they plotted harm, but because they had the patience to see, the wisdom to understand, and the power to change what needed changing. The silent shareholder was silent, no more.